So you're saying some of these men are in favor of repealing the 19th?
Yeah.
I mean, my position on this is
I just don't think that's a good way to if you're trying to date someone.
Well, yeah, I think talking probably like if you're trying to flirt with somebody.
Men, don't do that.
She also doesn't realize that repealing the 19th doesn't get rid of only women's rights to vote. It also gets rid of a lot of men's rights to vote. Here is the University of North Texas with the voting timeline. 1789, the Constitution does not establish any specific voting rights. States were given the power to regulate voting laws. Most states limited voting to white male landowners. 1970, only free white immigrants can become citizens. 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo grants citizenship to Mexicans living in U.S. territory, but it doesn't grant voting rights. So now we are 59 years later, 1856. All white men can vote. The requirement for property ownership was eliminated. So that's 1789 to 1856. Finally, all white men can vote. In 1866, 10 years later, Civil Rights Act of 1866 grants citizenship to all persons born in the U.S., regardless of color or previous enslavement. This act allowed all citizens in the U.S. equal protection under the law, excluded the rights of citizenship to indigenous people who did not pay taxes. 1868, the 14th Amendment extends citizenship to, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States. It enshrined the Civil Rights Act of 1866 as part of the Constitution, protecting it from being overturned by the Supreme Court. 1870, the 15th Amendment granted black men the right to vote. 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act denies people of Chinese ancestry from naturalizing as American citizens. That's 6 years after Supreme Court ruling Native Americans are not citizens. So now we have explicitly Native Americans cannot vote and the Chinese cannot vote. 1886, the Dawes Act grants citizenship to Native Americans who disassociate from their nations. 1890, Indian Naturalization Act required some indigenous peoples to apply for U.S. citizenship. In spite of being granted citizenship, indigenous peoples were still denied the right to vote until 1924. 1890, Wyoming becomes a state and the first allowing the women the right to vote. Women's right to vote has not been extended to federal elections at that time, but only state and local elections. Between 1890 and 1920, several other states extended suffrage to women. 1913, the 17th Amendment gives the power of selecting senators to the male people. 1920, the 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote. But it's still not everybody. 1922, the Supreme Court rules that people of Japanese heritage are ineligible to become naturalized citizens, and the same is ruled for Asian Indians until 1923. 1924, the Snyder Act grants indigenous people citizenship regardless of nation affiliation. 1943, the Magnuson Act repeals the Chinese Exclusion Act, giving Chinese immigrants citizenship and the right to vote. Remember, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and this is 1943. Chinese Exclusion Act is all the way in 1882. That is a full 61 years later. Chinese people can finally have citizenship and the right to vote. 1952, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 52, or the Warren McCarran-Walter Act, granted all Asian Americans the right to citizenship and to vote. 61, the 23rd Amendment gives residents of the District of Columbia the right to vote for president. Personally, I don't like that either. It has to do with the fact that DC is supposed to be only federal land, not a state. The states are the ones that are supposed to technically control the right to vote in the Constitution. 1965, the Voting Rights Act is passed. 1971, the 26th Amendment made the minimum voting age 18. 86, the Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act grants U.S. military, uniformed services, merchant marines, and other U.S. citizens living abroad up until really 1952, and you can even say 1961 or 65. Still not everybody had the right to vote. And even up to 86, citizens that were living abroad still could not vote. But now, only the women suffered. Those poor women. Sorry, ladies. Your suffrage was in 1920. And even then, the Chinese Exclusion Act was only overturned 23 years later. There were female immigrants in there. 9 years after that, the Immigration and Nationality Act, all Asian Americans, there were females in there. So, the delusion.